Navigating Through the Illusion, by David Rousseau. You don't see reality. You see a version of it edited, filtered, and quietly rewritten by a mind that learned long ago what to notice, what to ignore, and what to believe. Right now, as you read this, your brain is filling in gaps you don't realize are there. It is predicting what comes next, shaping meaning from fragments, and presenting it all to you as something solid and true. It feels seamless, certain, real, but it isn't. What you call reality, a construction assembled from memory, shaped by belief, and stabilized by stories you didn't consciously choose. The most convincing part is not the illusion itself, but the feeling that there is no illusion at all. This book is not about escaping reality. It is about seeing how it's made. Introduction. You are about to question something most people never think to examine, the nature of what you call reality. Not reality in the abstract, philosophical sense, but your reality. The one you wake up into each morning, the one that feels immediate, solid, and unquestionable. The one that tells you who you are, what matters, what's possible, and what isn't. It feels real because it is consistent. It feels true because it is familiar. But neither consistency nor familiarity guarantees accuracy. From the moment you were born, your brain began constructing a model of the world. It learned through repetition, through emotional impact, through language, and through the interpretations of others. Over time, patterns formed. Certain ways of seeing became automatic. Certain beliefs became unquestioned. Certain stories became identity. You did not choose most of them. You inherited them through family, culture, environment, and experience. You adapted to them because adaptation meant survival, belonging, and stability. And slowly, without noticing, the model became invisible. What was once constructed began to feel like something discovered. This is the architecture of illusion. Illusion, in this sense, does not mean something false or imaginary. It means something that appears complete, solid, and self-evident, but is in fact shaped by processes you do not see. Your perceptions are filtered. Your thoughts are conditioned. Your emotions are often responses not to reality itself, but to your interpretation of it. And yet, this is not a flaw. It is a feature of being human. Without these mental shortcuts, these assumptions, predictions, and narratives, you would not be able to function in a complex and unpredictable world. The brain simplifies in order to survive. It fills in gaps to maintain continuity. It creates certainty to reduce fear. In doing so, it builds a version of reality that is useful, but not necessarily true. The problem is not that illusions exist. The problem is that they go unnoticed. When you cannot see the lens, you mistake it for the world. When you cannot see the story, you mistake it for truth. When you cannot see the belief, you assume it is simply how things are. This book is an invitation to begin noticing, not to reject everything you believe, and not to dismantle your sense of self, but to examine it, to become aware of the hidden structures shaping your experience, to recognize the difference between what is observed and what is interpreted, to see where your certainty comes from, and to question whether it is as solid as it feels. Because within that awareness lies something powerful. Choice. When you begin to see your perceptions as constructions, your beliefs as inherited, and your identity as a narrative rather than a fixed fact, you are no longer confined to them in the same way. You gain distance, and in that distance, you gain the ability to respond rather than react, to question rather than assume, to create rather than unconsciously repeat. This is not about becoming detached from life. It is about engaging with it more clearly. There may be moments, as you move through these ideas, where things feel less certain, where familiar assumptions loosen, where the ground feels less solid than it once did. This is not something to fear. It is a natural part of seeing more deeply. Clarity often begins with a subtle form of disorientation, the realization that what felt obvious is not as fixed as it seemed. But on the other side of that uncertainty is something steadier than blind certainty. It is awareness. And awareness does not remove meaning, it allows you to choose it. As you continue, you will begin to notice the mechanisms behind your perceptions, the beliefs shaping your reactions, and the stories defining your sense of self. You will learn not only how these illusions are formed, but how to work with them, how to question them, reshape them, and, when necessary, let them go. You are not stepping outside of reality. You are learning to see how it is built. And once you see that, you can begin to live with intention rather than assumption, with clarity rather than illusion, and with a deeper understanding of both yourself and the world you experience. Chapter 1: The Architecture of Illusion. What feels most real is often what has been constructed most completely. Look around you. The room appears stable, continuous, and detailed. Colors are vivid. Objects feel solid. Space seems coherent. But this experience, so immediate and convincing, is not a direct recording of the world. It is a reconstruction. Your brain does not passively receive reality. It actively builds it. At any given moment, your senses are taking in a limited and incomplete stream of data. Your eyes capture only a narrow band of light. Your ears detect only a slice of possible sound. Your attention filters out far more than it includes. If you were consciously aware of everything available to your senses at once, it would be overwhelming, impossible to navigate. So, the brain does something remarkable. It predicts, using past experience, memory, and learned patterns. It fills in gaps before you ever notice they were there. It smooths over inconsistencies. It stabilizes motion. It constructs continuity where there is fragmentation. What you perceive is not raw input, but a refined model, one that prioritizes usefulness over accuracy. This is why illusions exist, not as errors, but as evidence. Visual illusions reveal how the brain interprets depth, contrast, and movement. Cognitive illusions reveal how we jump to conclusions, assign meaning, and create coherence from ambiguity. In each case, the brain is not failing, it is doing exactly what it evolved to do: make fast, efficient sense of an uncertain world. Certainty is the result, and certainty feels like truth. When your brain successfully predicts what it expects to see, hear, or experience, the result is a seamless perception you rarely question. You don't notice the construction, you only experience the outcome. The process disappears, leaving behind the impression that what you see is simply what is. But this certainty is not proof of reality. It is proof of consistency. The same mechanisms that allow you to recognize a face in a crowd also allow you to misinterpret a stranger's expression. The same pattern recognition that helps you navigate familiar environments can cause you to see threats where none exist, or miss what doesn't fit your expectations. Perception is not neutral. It is shaped continuously by what you have learned to expect. Memory is a key player in shaping how you perceive the world. Every moment you've lived adds to an internal library your brain references to make sense of the present. Yet memory is far from an exact record. It is selective, reconstructive, and colored by emotion. Each time you remember an event, you aren't simply retrieving it, you are actively reconstructing it, layering interpretation over the raw fragments of experience. And then you use that reconstruction to interpret what is happening now. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. You see what you expect, and what you expect is shaped by what you have seen. Gradually, patterns solidify into assumptions. Assumptions become beliefs. Beliefs begin to feel like facts. This is how narratives form, not as deliberate stories, but as quiet frameworks organizing your experience. You begin to interpret events in consistent ways. Things happen because of certain causes. People behave according to certain traits. You respond according to certain roles. These patterns become so familiar that they fade into the background. You don't experience them as interpretations. You experience them as reality. The architecture of illusion is not a single deception, it is a system, a network of perception, memory, prediction, and belief working together to create a world that feels stable and true. And for the most part, it works well enough. It allows you to function, decide, and move through life without constant uncertainty. But it comes at a cost. When the system operates invisibly, you lose the ability to question it. You assume that what you perceive is complete, that what you feel is justified, that what you believe is accurate. And because it all feels internally consistent, it rarely occurs to you that something might be missing, filtered, or added. The illusion is not that reality is fake. It is that your experience of it feels final. This chapter is not asking you to distrust your senses or abandon your understanding of the world. It is asking you to recognize that what you experience is a model, one shaped by biology, history, and interpretation, and models can be examined. As you move forward, begin to notice moments where your perception feels automatic, where your interpretation seems immediate and unquestionable, where certainty appears without effort. These are not signs that you are seeing clearly. They are signs that the construction is working. And once you begin to see the construction, even faintly, something shifts. What once felt fixed begins to open. And in that opening, the possibility of seeing differently begins. Chapter 2: The Invisible Lens. How beliefs shape experience. You do not experience the world as it is. You experience it as you believe it is. Beliefs are not just opinions. You consciously hold they are filters embedded so deeply in your thinking that you rarely notice them. They operate automatically, shaping how you interpret events, how you respond to people, and how you understand yourself. Like a lens you've worn for so long you've forgotten it's there. Beliefs quietly color everything you see, and because they are invisible, they feel like truth. Beliefs begin forming early. A single repeated message spoken or implied can take root. You're capable. You're difficult. People can't be trusted. Love must be earned. These ideas don't arrive as formal conclusions. They form through patterns, through what is rewarded, what is punished, what is encouraged, and what is ignored. Over time, the brain organizes these patterns into expectations about how the world works. Once a belief is formed, it does not remain passive. It becomes active, constantly scanning for evidence to support itself. This is not a conscious process. It is an automatic function designed to maintain stability. The brain prefers coherence over accuracy. It would rather be consistent than correct. This is why beliefs tend to persist, even in the face of contradiction. When you hold a belief, you begin to notice information that confirms it and overlook information that challenges it. If you believe people are unreliable, you will remember every canceled plan and forget every kept promise. If you believe you are not good enough, you will magnify mistakes and dismiss successes. The belief shapes the evidence, and the evidence reinforces the belief. This loop creates the illusion of proof. But what feels like objective reality is often selective attention. Beliefs also influence interpretation. The same event can produce entirely different meanings, depending on the lens applied. A delayed response to a message might be interpreted as rejection, indifference, or simple busyness. The facts remain the same, but the experience changes depending on the belief behind it. In this way, beliefs do not just describe your world, they help create it. They shape your emotional responses as well. What you feel is often tied not to what is happening, but to what you think it means. A situation only becomes threatening, embarrassing, or exciting once it passes through the filter of belief. Without that interpretation, the emotional reaction would not exist in the same way. This is why two people can live through the same circumstances and come away with entirely different realities. Beliefs also defend themselves. When challenged, they often trigger discomfort, doubt, resistance, even defensiveness. This is not random. The brain treats deeply held beliefs as part of its stability system. To question them can feel, at some level, like a threat. So, instead of re-evaluating, the mind explains away contradictions, rationalizes inconsistencies, and returns to what feels certain. This process is subtle, but powerful. It allows beliefs to remain intact even when they no longer serve you. Most of what you believe was never consciously chosen. It was absorbed through family dynamics, cultural expectations, social environments, and personal experiences. These beliefs helped you make sense of the world at the time. They provided structure, predictability, and a sense of control. But what was once useful is not always accurate, and what is familiar is not always true. The first step in seeing through this invisible lens is not to reject your beliefs, but to notice them, to recognize when an interpretation feels immediate and unquestionable, to pause and ask, what am I assuming right now? What belief is shaping this reaction? Because the moment a belief becomes visible, it changes. It is no longer the lens, you are now looking at it. And in that shift, something opens. What once felt fixed begins to feel flexible. What once felt like truth begins to reveal itself as perspective. You may not be able to control every thought that arises, but you can begin to question the framework those thoughts come from. and that is where freedom begins, not in having no beliefs, but in no longer being unconsciously governed by them. Chapter 3: Stories we think are true. You are not just living your life, you are telling a story about it. Every experience you've had, every success, failure, rejection, and connection has been organized into a narrative that explains who you are and how the world works. This story is not written all at once. It forms gradually, shaped by memory, emotion, and interpretation. Over time, it becomes familiar, predictable, convincing. Eventually, it becomes identity. You might describe yourself in simple terms: independent, anxious, driven, overlooked, resilient. But behind each of these labels is a story, a collection of moments you selected, emphasized, and linked together into something that feels coherent. The story explains your past, justifies your present, and quietly predicts your future. And because it makes sense, you rarely question it. But your story is not the same as what happened. It is your interpretation of what happened. Memory does not store events like a recording. It stores fragments, sensations, emotions, impressions. When you recall the past, you reconstruct it. You fill in gaps, highlight certain details, and ignore others. Over time, these reconstructions begin to align with the narrative you've built. The story becomes smoother, more consistent, and more convincing with each retelling. Contradictions are edited out. Supporting details are emphasized. The result feels like truth. This is how identities take shape. A child who is repeatedly praised for achievement may build a story of being the successful one. Another who is criticized may internalize being not enough. Someone who feels excluded may adopt the identity of the outsider. These roles are not assigned once. They are reinforced through repeated interpretation. And once the story solidifies, it begins to guide behavior. You don't just have a story, you start to live according to it. If you believe you are the responsible one, you may take on more than you can handle. If you see yourself as unlucky, you may expect things to go wrong and act in ways that reinforce that expectation. If your story says you are not worthy of connection, you may withdraw, creating the very isolation you fear. The story becomes self-fulfilling, not because it is inherently true, but because it shapes how you see and respond to the world. It also filters what you notice. Experiences that fit your narrative stand out and are remembered. Those that don't are dismissed or minimized. Over time, your life appears to confirm the story you already believe, even if that story is incomplete. This is the power of narrative. But there is an important distinction to make. Not all stories function the same way. Some stories are descriptive, they acknowledge patterns, without limiting possibility. Others are prescriptive, they define what must be true moving forward. A descriptive story might say, "I've struggled with confidence in the past." A prescriptive one says, "I am not a confident person." The first leaves room for change. The second closes it. Most people do not realize when their stories shift from description to prescription. The language becomes subtle, but the impact is significant. What began as an observation turns into a constraint. Identity hardens. Possibility narrows. And yet, the story itself remains constructed. This is not to say your experiences are not real. They are. But the meaning you've assigned to them is not the only meaning available. There are always other ways to interpret the same events, other patterns you could have noticed, other conclusions you could have drawn. Your current story is simply the one that was built. The moment you see this clearly, something changes. You are no longer inside the story in the same way you are observing it. You can begin to question which parts are accurate, which parts are assumed, and which parts no longer serve you. You can notice where the narrative has been overly narrow, overly harsh, or overly certain. And once you can see the story, you can begin to edit it, not by denying your past, but by reinterpreting it, by allowing complexity where there was once simplicity, by replacing rigid conclusions with open possibilities, by shifting from "this is who I am" to "this is a story I've been telling." This does not erase your identity. It makes it flexible. You are not confined to a single narrative. You are not limited to a fixed role. The story you've been living may feel familiar, even defining, but it is not final. And once you understand that, you are no longer just the character within the story. You become the one who can rewrite it. Chapter 4: The Emotional Mirage. Emotions feel like truth. They arrive quickly, often without warning, and carry a sense of certainty that is difficult to question. When you feel anxious, the world seems unsafe. When you feel rejected, it feels personal and real. When you feel angry, it feels justified. In these moments, emotion does not seem like a reaction, it feels like a direct reflection of reality. But emotions are not reality. They are responses to your interpretation of it. Between what happens and what you feel, there is a step so fast you rarely notice it. An event occurs, a look, a word, a silence, and your mind immediately assigns meaning. That meaning, shaped by your beliefs and past experiences, generates an emotional response. By the time you are aware of the feeling, the interpretation has already taken place. The result is seamless. You don't experience the interpretation, you experience the emotion as if it were caused directly by the event itself. This is the emotional mirage. It is the illusion that what you feel is a reliable indicator of what is happening, rather than a reflection of what you think it means. Consider how the same situation can produce entirely different emotions in different people. One person sees a challenge and feels excitement. Another sees the same situation and feels fear. The external reality has not changed, only the interpretation has. And from that interpretation, a completely different emotional world is created. Emotions are deeply informative, but they are not inherently accurate. They are signals, not conclusions. Fear can point to perceived danger, but it does not confirm that danger is real. Shame can suggest a violation of internal standards, but those standards may be inherited or outdated. Anger can indicate a boundary has been crossed, but it can also arise from misinterpretation or unmet expectations. Without awareness, emotions can distort perception. When you feel afraid, your attention narrows. You begin scanning for threats, often finding them whether they are there or not. When you feel ashamed, you may interpret neutral interactions as judgment. When you feel angry, you may assume intention where there is none. The emotion reinforces the interpretation that created it, and the cycle continues. This is why emotions can feel so convincing. They create their own evidence. But there is a critical distinction that often goes unnoticed: the difference between feeling something and being something. Feeling unsafe is not the same as being unsafe. Feeling rejected is not the same as being rejected. Feeling inadequate is not the same as being inadequate. The emotion is real, the experience is valid, but the conclusion it suggests is not always accurate. Learning to recognize this distinction changes everything. It creates space. Instead of being pulled immediately into reaction, you begin to observe. You notice the emotion as it arises, without assuming it is telling the full truth. You become curious. What interpretation led to this feeling? What belief is being activated? Is there another way to see this? This does not mean suppressing or dismissing emotions. It means understanding them. Emotions are messengers. They reveal patterns you may not consciously see. They highlight sensitivities, expectations, and unresolved experiences. When you pay attention to them without being controlled by them, they become a source of insight rather than distortion. Over time, this awareness changes your relationship with what you feel. Emotions may still arise quickly, but they no longer dictate your perception in the same way. You begin to separate the signal from the story, the sensation from the meaning, and in that separation, clarity returns. The emotional mirage does not disappear entirely. It is part of how the mind works. But once you recognize it, it loses its authority. What once felt absolute becomes something you can question, explore, and understand. You still feel, but you are no longer defined by what you feel in the moment, and that shift allows you to respond with intention, rather than react from illusion. Chapter 5: Cultural Illusions and Collective Dreams. Not all illusions are personal. Some are shared. They exist not just within individual minds, but across entire groups, families, communities, nations. These are the ideas so widely accepted that they no longer appear as beliefs at all. They feel like reality itself, simply because everyone around you treats them that way. This is the power of collective illusion. From an early age, you are immersed in systems of meaning you did not create. You learn what is considered success, what is considered normal, what is admired, what is discouraged. These definitions are rarely questioned. They are presented as facts, reinforced through repetition, and embedded into everyday life. Over time, they become invisible. Take the idea of success. In many cultures, it is tied to productivity, status, income, or recognition. These markers are treated as objective measures of worth, but they are not universal truths, they are agreements. In another time or place, success might be defined by community contribution, spiritual alignment, or balance rather than achievement. The standard feels real because it is shared. The same is true for concepts like normalcy. What is considered normal behavior, appearance, or lifestyle is often just the statistical majority shaped by cultural norms. Yet anything outside of it can feel wrong or inferior, not because it is inherently so, but because it falls outside the accepted pattern. These collective agreements shape perception at a massive scale. They influence how you evaluate yourself and others. They define what feels possible, what feels acceptable, and what feels out of reach. They create invisible boundaries, limits that are rarely spoken but deeply felt. And because they are everywhere, they are difficult to see. Economic beliefs are another example. Ideas like scarcity, competition, and merit-based reward systems are often treated as natural laws. You may believe that resources are limited, that success must be earned through struggle, or that outcomes always reflect effort or ability. While these ideas contain elements of truth, they are also shaped by systems, narratives, and historical conditions, not fixed realities. Yet they influence decisions, priorities, and self-worth every day. Cultural storytelling extends even further into identity, roles, and purpose. Narratives about what it means to be successful, attractive, masculine, feminine, independent, or fulfilled are constantly reinforced through media, institutions, and social interaction. These stories are so consistent that they begin to feel inevitable. You don't just observe them, you internalize them, and once internalized, they begin to operate like personal beliefs, even though they originated outside of you. One of the most powerful aspects of collective illusion is the illusion of consensus. When an idea is widely accepted, it feels unquestionably true. Doubting it can feel uncomfortable, even threatening, because it risks disconnection from the group. Agreement creates belonging, questioning creates distance. So most people don't question, they adapt. But widespread agreement does not guarantee accuracy. It only guarantees repetition. History offers countless examples of ideas that were once universally accepted and later challenged or overturned. What was once considered obvious can, over time, be seen as limited or even incorrect. This does not mean current beliefs are entirely wrong, but it does mean they are not beyond examination. Recognizing collective illusions does not require rejecting culture or separating yourself from society. It requires awareness, the ability to see that many of the standards shaping your thinking are constructed, not inherent. You can participate in them without being defined by them. You can question them without losing your place within them. You can choose which ones to adopt, which to adapt, and which to let go. Because the moment you recognize that something is a shared agreement, rather than an absolute truth, it changes your relationship to it. What once felt fixed begins to feel flexible. What once felt imposed begins to feel optional. And in that shift, a different kind of freedom emerges. Not freedom from society, but freedom within it. The ability to live consciously, rather than automatically, inside the collective dream. Chapter 6. The Illusion of Control. Human beings crave control. It is wired into us. From the earliest days of survival, predicting outcomes and influencing events meant safety, comfort, and opportunity. Yet much of life is fundamentally unpredictable. Despite this, we persist in believing that we can and must control what is ultimately uncontrollable. This is the illusion of control. It arises because predictability feels necessary. When events unfold in expected ways, the brain can relax. Patterns reduce anxiety. Systems feel manageable. The mind prefers the appearance of influence, even if true control is limited. It is easier to believe you can steer life than to confront the randomness and uncertainty inherent in existence. The problem is that this illusion can distort decision-making. When we overestimate control, we take unnecessary risks, overplan, or assume responsibility for outcomes beyond our reach. Conversely, underestimating what we can influence leads to passivity, frustration, or resignation. Both extremes arise from mistaking the boundaries of control. Uncertainty is often misinterpreted as danger. When outcomes are unclear, the mind fills in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. Fear amplifies unpredictability, making events feel more threatening than they are. This is why anxiety often arises, not from reality itself, but from the assumption that everything must be controlled or predicted. The first step in piercing the illusion is recognizing the difference between influence and control. Influence is the range of actions where your choices matter. Control, the ability to dictate outcomes beyond your reach. Life offers much more influence than it does absolute control. By focusing on what you can affect rather than what you cannot, you reduce anxiety and make more effective decisions. Navigating uncertainty requires shifting perspective. Instead of trying to eliminate unpredictability, learn to move through it with agency. Flexibility becomes more valuable than rigid plans. Awareness and preparation matter more than domination. And acceptance does not mean surrender. It means understanding limits, while acting intelligently within them. Letting go of the illusion of control does not weaken you, it empowers you. It frees you from the constant struggle against forces beyond your reach. It allows energy to flow into meaningful action rather than fruitless resistance. It transforms anxiety into clarity, reaction into choice, and fear into discernment. Ultimately, understanding the illusion of control is not about giving up it, is about seeing clearly what is yours to shape and what is not, and in that distinction lies genuine freedom. You can steer the sail, even if you cannot command the wind. Chapter 7. Seeing through the self. The self you believe you are the person who thinks, feels, and acts in familiar ways is not as fixed as it appears. Personality, habits, preferences, and even memories combine to create the sense of a continuous me. But this sense is largely a mental construct, a story the brain tells to maintain coherence. What feels solid is often fluid. Neuroscience shows that the brain continuously rewrites memory, adjusts perception, and adapts patterns of thought. Psychology confirms that identity is shaped by both conscious choices and unconscious influences. Contemplative traditions, from meditation to mindfulness, suggest that clinging to a fixed self is a source of suffering. Across disciplines, the insight is the same. The self is a process, not a thing. Memory plays a key role in this illusion. Your sense of continuity relies on recollection. Yet memory is reconstructive, not literal. Every time you recall an event, you are reconstructing it, subtly reshaping it to fit the narrative of who you believe you are. The result is a coherent story of self that feels inevitable, but is constantly edited behind the scenes. The ego reinforces this illusion. It resists change, clings to identity labels, and defines itself against the world. It seeks consistency, security, and recognition. When challenged, it triggers defensiveness, rationalization, and resistance. The ego wants you to believe you are a fixed entity, because stability feels safe. But that stability comes at the cost of flexibility, curiosity, and growth. Recognizing the self as a process creates choice. Instead of being automatically guided by habits, emotions, or past identifications, you can observe them. You can notice how thoughts arise, how beliefs shape perception, and how emotions influence behavior. This observation does not destroy the self. It gives you perspective. You are no longer trapped by the story. You are able to watch it unfold. Practices for observing the self include mindfulness, journaling, and reflection. These methods cultivate awareness of mental patterns, emotional triggers, and recurring narratives. You begin to see where reactions are habitual, where beliefs are assumed, and where identity is rigidly defined. In this awareness, the self becomes something to engage with consciously rather than be swept along by unconsciously. When the self is seen clearly, life changes. Choice replaces compulsion. Flexibility replaces rigidity. Actions become intentional rather than reactive. Relationships deepen because you interact with others as conscious beings, not merely as extensions of your habitual identity. Creativity and growth emerge because you are no longer confined by a fixed sense of who you must be. The self is not a cage, it is a lens. Once you see it for what it is, you can adjust it, refine it, and direct it without being dominated by it. The freedom to observe and choose is the freedom to live deliberately, beyond the illusions of a static me, and that is the foundation for real transformation. Chapter 8: A Tools for Disillusionment. Seeing through illusions is not a one-time revelation, it is a skill, a discipline, and a practice. The mind has spent a lifetime building frameworks of perception, belief, and identity, and they do not dissolve automatically. To pierce the fog, you need tools, methods that allow you to observe, question, and reshape your experience. One of the most powerful tools is cognitive reframing. This involves noticing the meaning you assign to events and deliberately considering alternative interpretations. When a setback occurs, instead of concluding "I failed," you might ask, "What can I learn from this?" Reframing does not deny reality. It shifts the lens through which you perceive it. Metacognitive skepticism is another key practice. It is the ability to step back from your thoughts and beliefs and ask, "How do I know this is true? Am I assuming something without evidence? Could there be another perspective?" This habit turns automatic assumptions into objects of inquiry, weakening their unconscious control over you. Inquiry journaling deepens this process. Writing down thoughts, beliefs, and emotional reactions allows you to see patterns that were previously invisible. Questions such as "Why did I feel this way?" or "What story am I telling myself?" expose the underlying structures shaping your experience. Journaling transforms fleeting feelings into analyzable data, providing clarity over time. Mindfulness and interception cultivate direct awareness of your present experience by paying attention to bodily sensations, breath, and the flow of thought. You learn to observe without immediately reacting. This awareness reveals the automatic triggers of emotion and thought, helping you distinguish between what arises in the moment and the story you are telling yourself about it. Another essential tool is fact-feeling separation. Emotions are real and meaningful, but they are not facts. Learning to notice the difference allows you to respond intentionally rather than react impulsively. You can ask, "What is actually happening?" versus "What am I assuming is happening?" A small but profound shift. Finally, narrative reconstruction empowers you to re-author your life story. Once you recognize your identity as a constructed narrative, you can begin to edit it consciously. You can highlight strengths, reinterpret challenges, and release limiting conclusions. This is not self-deception, it is active engagement with the lens through which you experience reality. No single tool is sufficient on its own. They work best together, reinforcing one another. Reframing becomes more effective with mindfulness. Skepticism is clarified through journaling. Narrative reconstruction requires both emotional awareness and cognitive examination. Clarity is not a destination. It is a continual practice of observing, questioning, and adjusting. Every moment provides an opportunity to notice the assumptions you carry, to test them, and to decide which serve you and which do not. By cultivating these tools, you gain something remarkable: the ability to move through life with intention, awareness, and discernment. You begin to respond rather than react, to choose rather than inherit, and to live with a level of clarity most people never experience. Illusions do not disappear entirely, but with practice, their authority fades, and you gain the freedom to see, feel, and act deliberately. Chapter 9: Living Beyond the Illusion. Once illusions are recognized, life does not become cold or meaningless. On the contrary, clarity opens a deeper engagement with reality, one that is freer, more intentional, and more authentic. Seeing the frameworks that shape your experience allows you to choose which to carry forward and which to release. You are no longer an unconscious participant in inherited stories, beliefs, or societal expectations. You begin to live consciously. Living beyond illusion starts with conscious belief formation. Instead of absorbing ideas automatically, you examine them. Does this align with what I value? Does it serve me or limit me? Beliefs become tools rather than constraints. You can adopt them deliberately, modify them thoughtfully, or discard them entirely. In doing so, you take responsibility for the lens through which you interpret life. Relationships transform as well. Once you see the illusions operating in yourself, you begin to notice them in others. Misunderstandings, judgments, and projections lose their power over you. You respond with compassion instead of reactivity. Conflicts shift from battles over truth to opportunities for understanding. Connection deepens because it is no longer mediated by unconscious assumptions. Purpose becomes self-chosen. Freed from inherited scripts, you can explore what matters most to you. You discover motivations that resonate with your values rather than with external expectations. Life becomes less about proving worth and more about creating meaning on your own terms. Humility is a natural byproduct of this clarity. Recognizing the limits of your perception and the constructed nature of your experience reduces arrogance and defensiveness. You no longer assume that what feels certain is absolute. This humility is not weakness, it is strength. It allows curiosity, learning, and growth to flourish. Freedom is perhaps the most profound consequence. When you see the illusions that once constrained you, you no longer have to act as if they are reality. You can choose your responses, shape your narratives, and navigate uncertainty with agency. Life becomes less about fighting invisible patterns and more about engaging deliberately with the world as it truly appears. Living beyond illusion does not mean perfection or constant clarity. There will still be confusion, emotion, and uncertainty, but you respond differently. You are aware of the forces shaping your perception, and you can work with them instead of being controlled by them. Ultimately, living beyond illusion is about conscious participation in your own life. It is about seeing clearly, choosing intentionally, and embracing the freedom that comes when the frameworks of thought, belief, and emotion are illuminated rather than hidden. Life becomes less about reacting to inherited assumptions and more about actively creating meaning, connection, and purpose. You are no longer just living a story you are told. You are living a story you choose. Chapter 10. Navigating the Truth, a Practical Path Forward. Seeing through illusions is not a single event, it is a lifelong practice. The insights you have gained from understanding perception, beliefs, and identity to recognizing emotional mirages and collective constructs are powerful, but their value is realized only when applied. This chapter offers a framework for integrating them into daily life, turning awareness into deliberate action. The first step is early recognition. Pay attention to moments when your mind leaps to judgment, fear, or certainty. Notice when emotions feel overwhelming or when interpretations arise automatically. These are clues that an illusion is active. By catching them early, you create the space to respond rather than react. Next comes distinguishing instinct from fear. Instincts are rooted in survival and often arise from clarity and attunement to reality. Fear is frequently a product of projection, belief, or narrative interpretation. Ask yourself, is this emotion signaling actual danger? Or is it reflecting a story I've been telling myself? This distinction guides action without unnecessary paralysis. Choosing beliefs consciously is another critical step. Reflect on the ideas you hold, the assumptions guiding your life, and the stories you tell yourself. Decide which beliefs serve your growth, align with your values, and enhance understanding. Release those that limit possibility, distort perception, or perpetuate suffering. Beliefs become tools, not shackles. Flexibility is essential. Life is unpredictable, and rigid thinking invites frustration. Embrace adaptability in thought, action, and perspective. Recognize that yesterday's truth may need adjustment today. Respond to circumstances with curiosity and discernment rather than habitual reaction. Finally, cultivate compassionate clarity toward yourself and others. Seeing through illusions can reveal harsh truths, but the goal is not judgment, it is understanding. Observe your own patterns without harsh self-criticism, and extend the same patience and insight to others. People act according to their own lenses, just as you do. Compassion emerges naturally when you recognize the constructed nature of perception and belief. The truth is not a destination. It is a practice of continuous observation, questioning, and choice. By learning to see your illusions without being dominated by them, you gain freedom, the freedom to act deliberately, to build meaning consciously, and to engage with life authentically. Navigating truth is an ongoing journey. There will be moments of clarity and moments of confusion. The path is not straight, but each step deepens understanding. The world may remain uncertain. Your mind may still create patterns, and emotions may still rise unexpectedly, but with awareness, reflection, and intention, you can move through life with purpose, resilience, and freedom. You are no longer a passive participant in your story. You are the navigator. You choose your path, guided by clarity rather than illusion, toward a life lived consciously, deliberately, and fully. Conclusion: the freedom of seeing clearly. The journey through perception, belief, emotion, and identity is not about dismantling reality, it is about understanding it. Throughout this book, you've explored how the mind constructs the world you experience, how invisible assumptions shape your reactions, and how personal and collective narratives define what feels true. These are not flaws, they are the architecture of human experience, but recognizing them is the first step toward living with clarity. Seeing through illusions grants freedom, freedom to question what you once took for granted, to examine the stories you have been telling yourself, and to recognize which beliefs serve you and which do not. It allows you to step back from emotional reactivity, to observe the self as a process rather than a fixed identity, and to navigate uncertainty with agency rather than fear. Clarity does not remove complexity, but it allows you to engage with it consciously. This freedom also brings responsibility. Once you are aware of the invisible frameworks shaping your experience, you have the power to choose how to respond. You can adopt beliefs intentionally, construct narratives deliberately, and act in ways that reflect your values rather than inherited assumptions. Life becomes less about reacting to circumstances and more about consciously shaping your experience. Importantly, clarity fosters compassion. When you see that perception, belief, and identity are constructed, you recognize that others are similarly guided by their own invisible frameworks. Misunderstandings, judgments, and conflicts lose their grip. Relationships deepen, empathy grows, and human connection becomes richer because it is grounded in awareness rather than projection. Life beyond illusion is not perfect, and it is not absolute. You will encounter uncertainty, emotion, and complexity, but you approach them differently, curiously, intentionally, and with discernment. The goal is not to escape illusion entirely, but to see it, understand it, and choose consciously how to live within it. Ultimately, this journey is about reclaiming agency, the freedom to live deliberately, to create meaning, and to engage with reality on your own terms. By learning to see your illusions, you gain the power to navigate life with clarity, compassion, and purpose. What once felt fixed, inevitable, or constraining becomes flexible, navigable, and full of possibility. Seeing clearly does not end with understanding. It begins there. From this point forward, life is no longer something that happens to you, it is something you actively participate in. Consciously and intentionally, you are no longer merely experiencing reality. You are shaping it,